I would like to thank Boulang Rameez Hall, Director of Emily Taylor Center, and Kathy Rose Mockery, Director Emeritus of the Emily Taylor Center, for supporting my passion for teaching zine making as a way of practicing feminism and building community. Everybody in this room who's on this panel, we might not have met through zine making, though many of us did, but working on zines in community with these folks has, oh, Isaac needs to change his name. With these folks, it has been a joy and deepened my relationships with them. So to me, that just speaks to the power of zine making. I also want to thank our cover artist, Tesba Smiley, as well as our zine project supporters. They're listed on the final page of the zine, but I especially want to thank our partners at the Commons, Emily Ryan, and at the Center for Service Learning, so Kate Kemper and Jamela Watson. Thank you to all our contributors for their amazing work, and to our panelists for their willingness to share and reflect on their work. So I just am going to share my screen here so that we can look at the prompts, and then I'm going to invite Imani to start us off by introducing herself, and then we'll just go through page by page. And so technology, we'll do a share screen here, share, and full screen. So I just want to, like I said, thank Tesba Smiley. Tesba is a master's student in the Indigenous Studies program and also the grad assistant at SGD, the Center for Sexuality and Gender Diversity. So this is her contribution. And then I also wanted to make sure that we saw the prompt, because basically I'm asking the folks on the panel to talk about their page, and their page addressed this prompt. So it's 2020. We are in the midst of a global pandemic, and November's election will determine the US presidency and its policies for the next 4 years. Regardless of who wins, the existing system has failed to prioritize the material needs of women, children, and gender minorities. This reality is exacerbated for those who experience compound oppression at the intersections of race, ability, sexuality, class, and more. With this collaborative zine project, we invited our community to imagine what a truly feminist political future would look like if we addressed issues facing women, children, and gender minorities. We asked our community members at KU and beyond, what would your feminist political platform look like? Or what issue or issues disproportionately affecting women, children, and gender minorities must a feminist platform address? This zine represents our contributors' responses to the questions posed above, as well as our dreams for a feminist future. And so with that, I invite Imani to start us off.
Hi, yes, let me unmute myself. Megan, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for inviting me. And thanks to all my panelists as well for being here. I guess I'll let me introduce myself again, also really quickly. I'm also a PhD candidate in the Department of American Studies, and I'm in the middle of trying to wrap up my dissertation in this here pandemic. So that's fun. But coming to the making and to the zine work and to reflecting on futures, feminist futures that kind of decenter some of the kind of binary ways of thinking that we live by right now. So I'll just talk really briefly about my zine page and how I kind of responded to the prompt in a more or less direct way. And so I just wanted to say first that for me, like, zine making came out of growing up in like DC, like subculture, like punk scene, and participating in like Lady Fest when I was like way young in the early 2000s, which was like a gathering for like alternative, like thought and lifestyle, and just where a lot of queer folks like came to carve out space and to be very present in spaces that would normally like snuff them out. So that kind of informed my initial zine aesthetic, and also the way that I thought about addressing a world that for some is becoming more and more apparent, but growing up, working class, Black woman, child, girl, person, outside of DC, which produces people with a like kind of political consciousness of sorts. Zines became a way for me to kind of address all of the experiences that I saw around me where I couldn't find words. It was like always zine making and dance. So making has always had a like lot of like democratic potential in the way that it like opens up conversations to be had when you're like first just like looking at something and digesting it, but it's beautiful or it's interesting or it's shocking or maybe it's not beautiful, but you're curious. It does things that sometimes word alone or word in a more formal format can't. So I love that we're talking about zines as a pathway to like map out our feminist futures. So with that being said, let me see. I'm sorry, it might look like I'm looking at two screens, and that's because I am, because the Zoom is on my phone and my screen is like over here. So I am paying attention to you all out there. I wanted to just pull up the zine so I can talk you through it as well. So the title, If You Stay Ready, was a reflection on a collaborative piece that I wrote this summer for Feminist Anthropology, where I and two other sister scholars were talking about what a Black queer feminist ethic would look like, and what it would look like in theory, but also what it would look like as a way of life. Like, what is a methodology for a life practice do? And we were like, how do we like organize, stay prepared, be ready? And that if you stay ready also reminded me of like the saying that my mom used to tell me all the time. And my mom lives 5 minutes from me, but I was sitting outside and I was like writing, and the sun was like out, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy. And then I felt melancholy. And I was just thinking about this moment, COVID, that has exposed all of these various forms of injustice, intersecting injustices that impact people's like real lives. And it's exposing them and also exacerbating them at the same time. So for me, my feminist practice also kind of dictates that I want to look into the spots in I like kind of like shy away sometimes from like talking about the quotidian or talking about like our lived experiences. And I kind of like look at like, think about the ordinary, because the things that are really ordinary are the things you forget to even name, the things you forget to say. And so I just started piecing together little drops of wisdom that my mom told me, and I wanted to share it in this kind of like overlapping way to trace like a lineage of people and thoughts that shape how I want to move in the world as someone trying to uplift others and to see myself as a tool for amplifying other people's voices. So yeah, If You Stay Ready is, I won't read the whole thing because we can see it and everyone will have access to it. So, but the one quote that was really important to me was my mom's quote, where she said, "We get up because we have no choice, whether we acknowledge it or not. We as a people turn every rock and make a way out of no way because that's what we have always done and will continue to do. Do not worry and do not fear. We adapt to make life livable. So, my dear, let's refuse to quake in the face of complications that we cannot shake." And for me, that really actually signifies the way that I think about knowledges, the way that I think about experiences, in that they're always multiple, but my priority is always for those who like magnify bullets, for those who are the most precarious. And so like it also shapes the way that I think about solidarity, transnational solidarity, class-based, anti-Black, anti-racist solidarities, and queer solidarities that reach beyond your own lived experiences, so that when you have solidarity in something, you will move everything around you to make sure that that comes true, even if you don't understand all of the minutia around why it has to be. And I look to my mother and to, you know, I have Pearl Primus up there in the back. And then in the background of the zine, you can see me kind of dancing as well, because my other language, when I can't find words, is dancing. So the colors were really bright. And I wanted to juxtapose that with the content that is kind of reflective. And yeah, so I guess there'll be plenty of time to talk later. I forgot to set my timer, and I know we have 5 minutes, so I don't want to go for too much longer, but I'm open for questions later as well. Thank you.
So Divya, do you want to go next?
So hi everyone, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Divya Radhika Bhalla, and my pronouns are she, her. And thank you so much, Megan, and to the Emily Taylor Center for inviting me both to be a part of this zine, as well as, you know, to come speak on the panel. I'm really excited to be a part and to be among such company, because it gave me goosebumps when I read the zine yesterday and I saw all the other pages and all the other contributions. So there's really powerful stuff over here. So I'm very honored to be a part of this. The way I was interpreting the prompt was to kind of really think about my feminist awakening and really think about the role of education in that. And also kind of like, I was like, oh, Megan is asking us to kind of think about a feminist utopia and a feminist future and what that would look like. And that was kind of a really tricky, difficult question to handle. So the only way I was able to kind of articulate what I was thinking was through the movie The Matrix, which was also a really kind of, you know, important awakening, a moment for me in terms of my, you know, love for science fiction. And if anyone, you know, wants to talk about The Matrix later on, I'd be happy to do that. I'll just read out some really short excerpts so that I don't run over in terms of my time. The entire piece, everything that is within quotes are direct kind of quotes from The Matrix. And it starts with Morpheus actually telling Neo, "This is your last chance. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes." And then I'll just skip ahead to the end. My feminist awakening is an experience that I can only describe as plugging out of the matrix. As an educator, I believe that education can help us to plug out of the matrix, to understand the machinations of the puppet masters, to unveil the Wizard of Oz. When I dream of a feminist future, I therefore want education to be accessible to everyone, but especially gender minorities and women, and not just the privileged. When I envision a feminist future, I see my unborn child plugging out of the matrix. But whereas my experience was painful, theirs is not. For feminism has always been a part of their education, for they are always aware of the illusion. The children of the future receive an education that is specifically designed to plug them out of the matrix, an education where geography includes the politics of cartography, where history is taught from below, an education where feminism is as much required learning as math, an education which distinguishes between feminism and feminism, where feminism is intersectional, as Kimberly Crenshaw terms it, and interdisciplinary, as Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak views it. For it is no accident that I reference my feminist awakening through Marxist critics, where feminism is inclusive of gender identities across the spectrum. For it is fitting that the analogy for my feminist awakening derives from The Matrix, as the Wachowskis, who wrote and directed the film, have since come out as trans women, so that when my child plugs out, they awaken not to a dystopian reality, but to a feminist future, to a feminist utopia. Welcome to the real world, which is what, again, Morpheus tells Neo, but in a very kind of sinister, morbid way. But in this feminist utopia, you know, we are awakening to a real world that is a feminist utopia rather than a dystopian reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Divya. I got goosebumps while you were reading that. So welcome, Anne.
I also got goosebumps, Divya. That was wonderful. I hope everybody's enjoying the whole cat content. This is one of my 4 babies, and hopefully he will move out of the way so that I can see my notebook. Hello, everybody. My name is Sasala. I am a recent MA graduate student. So Imani, I totally feel you on trying to finish a large work in the middle of a pandemic. I also want to start off with a land acknowledgement, recognizing that I, as a white person, am living on land that was stolen from the Kansa, Kaw, Shawnee, and Osage peoples, and that the system of settler colonialism that allowed for that, or that created that system, also worked in tandem with chattel slavery. So I just wanted to recognize that before talking about my page. I came to zines actually through Meg, and I can never thank her enough for introducing me to them years ago. And I started out making zines largely to inform, to share information that wasn't necessarily being shared elsewhere. But as I've gotten more into my zine process, and as I've thought a lot specifically about the way we make zines as an artistic practice, oh, there's another cat, specifically thinking about zines as a process of collage, of piecing together all of these different things together, whether it's words, images, other found objects together, I have started to do less informing with my zine works, and in particular with this piece, which was called See Me, I tried to do more of an emotional processing, especially because I read all of this affect theory, which is all about emotions, how they circulate, what they do, the spaces that they create for my master's thesis, and I had a lot of things that I needed to process. In particular, this page was me processing my experience as a graduate teaching assistant in a film and media studies department. There was this irony that followed me throughout my 2 years in the department, where film is about teaching people to see in a different way, not just to see through a camera lens, but to see all of the different ways that gazes, have controlled the ways that we think, the ways that we understand our own bodies, and the ways that we understand the bodies around us. So I was teaching all of my students to see in a new way, and yet I went unseen as their professor, constantly getting misgendered by my students, being misgendered by their parents when their parents were emailing me because they were unhappy with things I was doing as their professor. And I just sat there one day and was like, wow, how does this happen? So I didn't give a specific answer to what does a feminist political future look like in this zine, but I was thinking about how visibility is so fraught for trans and non-binary people. Are we being seen as who we actually are? Are we able to actually present as who we are and be seen in that way and still maintain the safety that we need to live our lives? In this future, I would just be seen, or I wouldn't even have to worry about being seen. And that's something that I wish for everybody else, that we could just be seen as who we want to be. So in the piece, a lot of what I did was layer different symbols of what I think about as this controlling gaze, as the gaze that doesn't see me, even though I'm teaching it to see me. So there's lots of different cameras on here looking down at me. There's symbols of sort of I tried to make it an androgynous masculinity while still having a little bit of professorial flair to it, because I do identify as non-binary, but I don't necessarily identify as masculine, but I swing slightly more masculine because it ups my chances of being seen slightly more as who I am than if I do allow myself to present as a little bit more feminine. Which is a whole other can of worms that we won't open here. And then of the few words that I did put on here, the main refrain is "Why Can't You See Me?" which is also the verse from Mel Blum's song of the same name off of their recent album Pity Boy. It's this phenomenal album where Blum is really for the first time talking about being trans, masc, and non-binary. And the refrain from the song just haunts me. It's "Why can't you see me? Why can't you see me?" over and over and over. And that was what I felt during my time as a teaching assistant. So this page definitely attempted more of an emotional and not terribly linear processing of that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is how one of the things I did, which is why this image is not necessarily as clean around the edges as everyone else's might be, is that I intentionally went outside of the frame, meaning that I went off of the edges of the piece of paper that I was working off of, because as I thought about what my experience had been like, I thought a lot about how when we look at films and when we watch films, we're not just seeing things that are happening right in front of the camera. There's this concept of off-screen space. So things that, and off-screen space can be physical, but it can also be emotional, mental, and imagined. And how I had to go off screen in order to feel like I was myself when I was teaching. So I started to push myself to go off the page and to see the types of things I could create when I wasn't just thinking about, the square or the rectangle of the page. I think I'm right around my 5 minutes, so I want to stop there. I'm so excited to hear about the rest of the panelists and their processes. And I wanted to thank you again, Megan and Emily, for inviting me here this evening.
Isaac, you're up.
Okay, so normally I make more abstract zines because I like more abstract, but this is the one I took quite literally. I actually wrote out my feminist platform. And so I wanted to focus on what I really see as the main root of like every issue that happens nowadays. And it's this lasting legacy of the age of colonialism and imperialism. And we live in this kind of age of neo-colonialism and imperialism. And so in my feminist utopia, my ideal feminist future, there would be like 5 main things addressed. There's actually a second page to this. So the first one would be a socialist revolution, because imperialism is just capitalism. It's an uplifting of the working class, the uplifting of all workers. And one of the main points here I want to point out is that reproductive labor is socialized. So it's not just the responsibility of like the mother to take care of the child. It's the responsibility of all of us as a collective to take care of our children. Related to this is ending white supremacy, uplifting movement like national liberation movements, and especially women within those movements, and then also gay and trans liberation. So basically just revisualizing and reconceptualizing sex, gender, and sexuality, and enforcing this by ending the pathologization of LGBT people and by educating people about it more in school, starting in childhood. And then there's reproductive justice, which is really important to me. So reproductive justice is a lot of things, but essentially it would just be guaranteeing the right to people to have families the way they would desire to have families, whether that be having no families at all, like you don't want to have kids, you should be within your right, not to have children. Or if you want to have kids, it should be your right to ensure that your children and yourself exist in a safe space where you have access to everything you need. Another large part of it too would be addressing trends of eugenics and how they evolve over time. And then of course, ableism is a large part of it as well. So this kind of all revolves around healthcare in the end, just kind of reformulating how the healthcare system works, reformulating how the healthcare system perceives people. And so another part of ableism would be increasing accessibility as well. So those are my 5 main points of like a feminist platform, a feminist revolution, which is why I called it revolutionary feminism.
You're muted, Meg. Yeah.
Oh,
I think you're good.
Okay, so I'm up next. My name is Miguel Roel. Pronouns are he, him, his. And mine's pretty short, so I'll just kind of go through the whole thing and explain step by step what was going through my head. So first off, the title, Feminist Liberation. I specifically chose liberation because I think it's really important to start bringing back that notion of liberation from oppression. I think, unfortunately, since the 60s, in the 60s, you had a lot of that rhetoric. You had women's liberation, you had the colonial liberation movements, you had Black liberation that was being expressed through various organizations like the Black Liberation Army. And since then, we've kind of moved from the rhetoric of liberation to a rhetoric of empowerment, which I think is so much more individualized rather than this idea of like collectively overturning structures of oppression. And so liberation, I think, is really important to bring that back into our political consciousness as like a mass movement to overturn structures rather than just seeking out individual empowerment. And for me, I grew up poor with a single mom who relied on government aid. So a lot of what I envision as liberation has to do with economic liberation, because of just like seeing my mother struggle and seeing all the other women in my life struggle when it comes to just the day-to-day getting food on the table. So number one is the economic liberation of all women and gender minorities to participate equally in the whole economy. And to do that, the establishment of free higher education, trade school, and professional training and certification, and guaranteed job placement after the completion of education. I think that's really a big one. I know when I was a kid, I was always told about how important education is, that was the way we got ourselves out of poverty, everything like that. But, you know, after actually going through the education process and, you know, getting a bachelor's degree and then getting a master's degree, I saw that really, even with education, just finding a job and getting placed in gainful employment is so difficult because of just the fact that we have permanent structural unemployment in our economy. And that's a feature of our economy. It never goes away. It never has gone away, except when there's been an effort by the state to step in and abolish unemployment. So that's really a big one that I think would liberate a lot of people, because it would guarantee people the ability to make a living rather than having to scrounge and try and, you know, just find any job and have to compete with other people who are also unemployed trying to find jobs. And like Isaac, I also have the socialization of reproductive labor, meaning free childcare services. I know like the cost of childcare is just skyrocketing to ridiculous levels. So it's like for a working class person, it's like impossible to have a large family anymore and to be able to adequately care for them. Fully paid maternity and paternity leave, free comprehensive education and after school care for children. And number two is the reorganization of the economy to prioritize social need and sustainable development. Something that I think we miss a lot is that the way the economy is structured right now is really just to meet consumer demands, and it's structured for the private profit of company owners. And really, it isn't built towards giving everybody what they need, which is why we have housing shortages, because it's not actually profitable to solve the housing shortage crisis. It's actually more profitable to leave houses empty so that their value increases and increases and increases because of supply and demand. So instead of that, you know, we should implement a democratically planned economy that meets goals that are socially determined to improve our living standards rather than just being based on a market. And then finally, the last point is the social and political empowerment of women and gender minorities. This to me is a really key point that I think a lot of people don't talk enough about, which is that we need to establish organizations that people can actually wield power through. In America, we talk about political empowerment in terms of rights, but really you don't have any rights if you don't have an organization that can force those rights to be enacted and to be respected. So we need to establish political organizations that are composed and controlled by women and gender minorities, and that these organizations are funded collectively so that they can actually operate and have a staff that can that can fight for the rights of women and gender minorities.
Thank you, Miguel. And then last but not least, we have Rachel.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a master's student in the social work program at KU and have been drawing comics for like, I don't know, as long as I've been able to hold a pen and also read. So in terms of format, I find I was really interested in what Imani was saying. I find that like there's so much more that can be said with a combination of words and images, and that there's like kind of a really elegant economy in combining those things. So my page is about kind of my personal journey of coming to understand my own queer and non-binary identity. And the way that I think about that as related to a feminist future is that I think a lot about, like, especially because of the program that I'm in right now, the directionality between like policy shift and changes in who has political power and culture. So like our personal everyday experiences being either a result of kind of top-down changes or a way that those changes can happen. So as a kid and a young adult, I didn't hear my identity talked about, and I didn't recognize it. And that, like, superficially doesn't necessarily sound like a political issue, but of course it is. And so when I imagine, in fact, I'll read from the zine. Let me see, I have it open. The most fundamental human experiences are felt before they are articulated. Yet, when I dream of a feminist future, I dream of a world where a child, like the one I was, can anchor their identity to the world in a common language. I included this quote by John Balby, who was like a pioneer scholar in attachment theory. But the quote is relevant, is what cannot be communicated to the mother cannot be communicated to the self. Yeah, I guess when I imagine a feminist future, I imagine one where people understand like the nuance of gender and the way that it often can't be captured by language, but there also somehow exists language that can represent that, or like tools that we can use to talk about that. So in the page I said, in the future, I imagine queer experiences are both accommodated by language and allowed to transcend it. In that future, I am seen, I am found. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you. I've really enjoyed hearing everyone talk. Thanks, y'all.
Emily, would you mind dropping a link to the zine to everyone in the chat, and that way folks can look at it on their own as we continue talking? Thanks. So just to kind of reflect a little bit, what I, like Divya, seeing the whole thing together was really powerful. And, you know, and this idea of the political is personal, the personal is political, right? That comes out of second wave feminism. I really saw that reflected, right? We had some people who are very much focused on the structural issues that are oppressing women and trans folks and non-binary folks. And then also that very personal, like, visibility, right? And being seen. And that continues throughout. If you look throughout the zine, some other contributors were writing about their non-binary identity and being seen. So yeah, so just those are some interesting things that emerged, and also seeing like the connection between those things. Like I know, Isaac, for you, you know, your identity as a trans man is very tied to that structural, right, reproductive justice, having access to the healthcare you need, right? So yeah, so I just wanted to kind of tease that out a little bit. And then just kind of open it up to ask if anybody has thoughts on the relationship between zine making as a practice and feminism, or if you have questions for each other. Yeah, why don't we just open it up? Anybody want to start us off with that? We can also invite audience members to ask questions as well if we want. We have about 20 minutes left, so I want to make sure we can have some conversation.
I can say a bit about zine making as feminist practice, because this is something that my students ask me a lot, because I do teach zines as a unit in, you know, when I'm teaching composition. And one of the things that I'm talking about really is how the zine is a countercultural genre, and to really not to waste that opportunity, but to really tap into the culturality of that genre. But they keep asking me, but isn't feminism mainstream now? You know, what's countercultural about feminism? And so I kind of have to tell them about, like, just because people are talking about it more thanks to social media, and just because there is more of, you know, just because there's more visibility in terms of the movement, doesn't mean that the policies and the social structures are, you know, there to, that are not still oppressing gender minorities. So that's why I think zine making in itself is definitely a very feminist and countercultural practice, and they both kind of feed into one another in that way, in that countercultural aspect way.
Yeah, thank you, Divya.
Can I add on to that?
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree. I'm so happy to hear that you're also teaching zine making to students. I think every time I do it, it's so much fun. I even do it with my kids. I have 2 kids, and sometimes when they are really upset and can't find words, I'm like, here is the paper. You know how to make a mini zine. Figure it out, slip it under my door, give it to me. We can talk if you want. If not, it opens up so much space. And that also reminds me of like another reason why I love zine making, and even like, and even sometimes even more like collaborative zine making, is because I used to all the time, you know, find zines and just figure out the world outside of what I knew. And lots of times it was also just someone like feeling like you were saying, Rachel, like not seen or not heard or not understood in a particular way that wasn't evident, that wasn't like obvious, you know. And a lot of the and a lot of the things that we forget to, or we want to talk about, there aren't words to express the way how you feel when those things are obscured, right? When those things seem not to matter. So for me, zines also create a way to like remix life differently, you know, and it invites people in a way that creates like kinship almost across time and space. Like I have like a pile of zines that mean nothing to no one, but they mean everything for me, you know, and it also creates like this like whole type of like personal archiving. And you can also just trace the way you've come to think of things in the world. It's a physical thing, or it can be even like it creates digital spaces of belonging too. We have a digital zine that we get to share, and even though it's digital, it still reminds us of all of these analog processes that we like to do with each other. So I remember I was listening to a talk like a week ago, and I also think of like zine making in the same way that I think of like abolition, feminism, abolition futures, and that space that they open up is through the imaginative terrains that they like create, right? Like that you can put something out there in a speculative way, that there's no absolutes, and there's not all these people maybe that will be judging you in the same way, because the circulation of that information travels differently at a different time and a different pace. And it makes me think of myself and my future selves and people I know, of working outside of settler time, working outside of the way that capitalism makes us normalize things that we should never normalize, so that we can work through them, so that we can produce more. And it's back to the Marxist question of like, how are like gifts commodified and then disposable, you know? And I'm like, the zine is there. It's a physical remnant of me being there, of me holding a place with other people. And Ruth Wilson Gilmore was talking about abolition as creativity in the making, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but she was talking about the making of culture and the making of sociality outside of the known, and relying on the uncertainty to guide us, and like the impulse to settle. I think zines are always there to remind us, like, don't settle in this, like push against it, you know? And I like to think about zines as like remixing even something that's unnameable, but it relates back to us, to ourselves personally, but also connects us to a larger community.
If I could jump off of what you were saying, Imani, I think of zines, especially in what this zine does, which is imagine these political futures. What zines do is when you read a zine, you're already in that future. You can think of a zine as an artifact of that feminist future, which is also for some people the feminist present. You know, we have, in writing our pages and in making our zines, we've created that future for ourselves, even if it's not necessarily physically or like truly lived in every moment of our daily lives. And what zines do is they can be so tactical. They can create that break and allow us to, and Divya, I'm sure you'll love this part, you know, they can be that pill. They can create that break and allow us to see things or to start to experience things in another way. One of the conversations I've been having a lot with my partner recently, because we both work at big evil capitalist corporations who are incredibly anti-union, is, well, when we're seeing all of these horrible things happening, like, how can we get our message out? And it's like, oh, well, maybe we just drop a whole bunch of zines in the break room or in the bathroom or in some of these spaces that are not as heavily surveilled as, you know, the other spaces where we work. You know, so there's these ways that we can, you know, place a zine somewhere and it changes somebody's life just for a couple of minutes, even if they don't take it home with them. And that is the intentional work that is needed to create the feminist political future that we all want to live
in. Yeah, for me, I made my first zine in 2016, so not that long ago. And I was taught by someone who grew up in similar culture to Imani, of like that punk feminist riot girl culture. And so she taught me how to make a mini zine at a queer zine explosion workshop. And ever since then, you know, right then I really recognized the pedagogical possibilities of zines. And so I used to be a professor, and I would always include zines as one form of assessment. And as other folks have said in this room, they have also used zines in teaching. That's actually how I met both Divya and Aya, who's here. Hello. And so I immediately saw that potential and the way in which making together creates community, the way that you can be collaborative in creating a zine like this one, where each page is by somebody different. The fact that we're taking the means of production into our own hands. We're challenging the you know, dominator media, the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchal mass media, and they provide, you know, like other people have said, voices or spaces for people who have either ideas that are kind of like at the margins or identities that are at the margins. So those are some of the reasons why I really love zines and see them as a way to practice feminism. And also the sharing economy, right? Imani mentioned gifts. That's another thing that I love about zines is even if people are selling them, it's not for much money. It's usually to just recoup their costs, you know? And so there really is this community. And I also have a basket of zines over there that just makes me happy. And I can look at them and remember exactly, oh, I got this one at KC ZineCon #4, you know? And so they really do, the materiality of them, I think, is really important in terms of connecting us. And this is actually the first digital zine that I've been a part of. And so it's interesting for me to see how we're connecting digitally and how that is really exciting. And an alternative to what I usually focus on, which is that analog materiality piece. Does anybody else want to speak to that relationship, or does anybody have questions for our panelists or for each other? I don't know if we have any of our other contributors here today. If you are interested in sharing your page, you can let us know.
I'll ask a question if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you've mentioned collectively, you have mentioned a couple of ways in which the zines have thwarted other economies or thwarted other systems that we know too well, potentially. And I'm wondering what they do in the realm of collecting, thinking about like visual artifacts and museums and archives and things like that, given how often I think they're mass produced usually, or large numbers of prints. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that, but knowing there's a few museum folks in the crowd.
And then you know that the archive, right? Zine archive.
I could, I just wanted to wait since I'd already said something already, but one place that there's a couple of places that are not popping up in my, but like the archiving of zines, like when I was thinking about for the last chapter of my dissertation, doing either a mock-up or a section of it as in zine format, just to disrupt kind of the traditional dissertation kind of book form, just because why not, you know? So I was trying to find different types of zines and like the way that they had been like published and produced and collected, archived, thinking about ephemera, and also thinking about like before we were even calling them zines, like other types of print media that functioned in the same way and how they had been used and distributed for like to spread the word, to cause dissent, to disrupt, to you know, subvert, you know, a certain type of oppressive system. Or ideology, way of thinking, whatever. But the Barnard Center for Research on Women has a massive zine collection. I'm on my phone on Zoom, so I'll try to get the link and like drop it in. But the curators and head librarians, they are so generous with their time. So if anyone was looking to find a specific time frame, or even if they don't have it, they'll point you in the right direction to Groundswell or another place that that was just more of a resource add-in, but that was.
Thank you.
Yeah, also at KU, we have a great resource. We have the Wilcox Collection, and they acquired, I think, thousands, maybe hundreds, thousands of zines that were part of the Solidarity collection. And so that's a really great resource. If you're teaching, I've worked with the folks there. They'll pull zines for you. You can have your students look through them. Yeah, so definitely check that out. That's at the Spencer Research Library. Yeah, does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I can also highly recommend the Zine collection that's part of the Digital Transgender Archive. They have a lot of different things, and I think their Zine collection or print media type collection goes all the way back through the 1960s, although there's not as much from back then. And they have a variety of different zines covering so many different topics. I can post the link in the chat for that.
Awesome. Anybody have any final remarks before we kind of start to close for the day? So again, I would just
sorry, I wanted to ask, Emily, I don't think the link is working. I can't get the visuals and I would love to get them.
I will repost that, sorry.
Just wanted to, mention that. Yay, women, good job. And
should work that time.
So I want to announce that we are going to continue this digital collaborative zine project. And so next semester, we're going to have a masculinities issue. And so that will be the focus. And so I invite everybody here to contribute to that one. I'd love to see our contributors to this zine in that, as well as more people. Let's make it 50 pages. But anyway, I just really, really want to sincerely thank everybody who spoke today. Like I said, these are all wonderful humans that I have connected with and through zines. And so, like I said, I really feel like that speaks to the power of zine making. And also, I'm going to pass it over to Emily because we have a second Educate and Act, or Kate, or both, a second Educate and Act event coming up this Thursday.
Kate, do you want to speak to it? And I'll put the link in the chat.
could I just say, yay, people. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
My
Hi, everybody.
earlier comment. Thank you.
Okay. Hi. I think my internet is being kind of weird right now. So if you can't hear me, somebody chat me and tell me that you can't hear me. My name is Kate Kemper. I'm the Assistant Director in the Center for Service Learning here at KU. And like Meg said, we do have a second event on Thursday called Queering the Vote. So it's all about queer and trans voter engagement. We have a really awesome lineup of presenters, and Emily just put the link to the event page in the chat. These events are falling within what our office is calling KU Serves Week, which is something that we do every season and focus on sort of a different theme or a different topic. And so because it's National Voter Education Week, it's all about civic engagement, voting, and action in the community. So there's a ton of other virtual events going on throughout this week, kind of put on by the powers that be associated with National Voter Education Week. So we put a list together on our website, so I'm going to put that in the chat as well. There's a lot of Twitter conversations happening right now about voter education and what that looks like right now during the pandemic. So definitely feel free to take a look at that. Emily, anything else you want to share about anything going on this week?
Yeah, I think I can announce this. We're going to launch a new weekly series leading up to the election, wherein we will have civic engagement office hours. And the county clerk, Jamie Hsu, will be on hand to answer any questions or straighten out any misinformation that anybody's trying to really confirm before they spread it or share it about how to vote in the November election, given the pandemic and all of the extenuating circumstances right now. So. We're going to start that Friday at 11, and I will post it as much as I can through Twitter and our website and everything like that.
Great. So again, I just want to thank everybody. Please share the zine widely. And we did record this event, so I'll make sure to share it with you all. Just thank you for sharing this time and space with us. I really appreciate it. Stay well and stay in touch. Bye, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you, everyone. Bye.